Awesome. Well, hello, everybody. And thank you so much for joining our webinar today. I'm excited to have Linta Mustafa of Vitract with me. And the topic today is about the evolving experience for consumers, especially in healthcare, and also change in demand and expectation from companies. And because Linta and I are obviously both women, and women's health is a prime example of the big area that was neglected by traditional Western medicine. And now it's amazing to see that women are taking matters into their own hands, and we are now starting companies that address topics like PMS, PCOS, fertility, postpartum, or menopause. And this trend really became a movement, and we are really seeing like this whole landscape shifting. And previously looking at supplements and alternative medicine approaches, the evidence-based traditional group was looking down at more alternative treatments, but we're definitely seeing a movement from there as well, because supplements and lifestyle interventions and changes can have a huge impact on a person's health, and that is undeniable. And as brands are also pushing into the evidence-based approach with clinical trials, providers also feel more comfortable and confident now with this whole topic. And this is typically where my company, Citrus Labs, comes in, bridging the gap between the more anecdotal data landscape and then actual clinical evidence. And Linta, I think you have a similar story about why you started Vitract, right? You were not really taken seriously by your healthcare provider, and please tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I'm Linta. I'm the CEO of Vitract, and a little bit about myself. I was a former national wrestler. I spent a little bit over a decade wrestling, and wrestlers have the same sort of pains that ballerinas do, where we struggle a lot with our weight. Every time you compete, you cut over 10 pounds. So you're fluctuating a lot in that weight, and that, of course, has negative impacts on your gut microbiome. And I started to have experience inflammation in the joints of my hands. I went to go see a doctor on campus. This is when I was in university. And they said, well, it's not arthritis. We don't know what it is. And then consequently, I spent almost the next 2 years talking to different specialists, rheumatologists, autoimmune doctors, and wasn't able to get a clear diagnosis. And so the only solution that was presented to me was to take an immunosuppressant for the rest of my life. And I tried that for a little bit. I did it for several months, and I felt horrible. Side effects were, so uncomfortable, from feeling nauseous every day to just like feeling completely drained of energy. And I was 20 years old at the time. So, and I also was studying genetics in school. So I had a little bit more information than the average person to work with. And I did what everyone with a chronic illness does at some point. I was scouring the internet for answers. I did a ton of research. I was in Facebook groups and Reddit threads and all these different things, trying to find my way to get into an answer. And eventually all of that led me to working with a functional medicine doctor who heard out my symptoms in a way that I wasn't getting in traditional care, where really the model is that the first initial appointment is over an hour long. They sit with you, they chat with you, they get to know you intimately, the way you live your life, the things that you do that are sort of outside of just taking medication that really impact your health. And then they create a whole plan for you. And after 5 months working with that provider, almost all my inflammation was gone, and I've been completely off medication. I went back to my rheumatologist, reran testing, everything came back in normal ranges. And that was the first time I realized that nutrition and supplements and lifestyles have a really profound impact to health, and a lot more than traditional care providers actually give it credit for. So that was my first insight into there's a big problem here that's not being addressed in the healthcare system today, and then started working on different ways to tackle and hone in on sort of the point of tackling this massive problem.
Wow, I did not know that they put you on immunosuppressants. That is wild. And
Yeah.
obviously, with 20 years old, it's very unlikely that you have arthritis. Yeah,
Hmm.
that's an amazing story. And then I think, because you mentioned that, like traditional medicine does not know a lot about nutrition and lifestyle. I think they changed it now, but I think in med school, you only have to do 20 hours on nutrition, which is basically nothing compared to the
Yeah.
rest. And I
It's one
really hope,
course.
and I think, yeah, I think it's changing, but I really hope that it's changing even more because like these interventions can have such a big impact. And
Yeah.
how did you come up with your test, and why are you doing Vitract? Why are you doing this in this sense and not in another way?
Hmm. It's a great question. So when we first started the company, we interviewed a ton of customers and care providers to try to figure out what was the point of entry into the market, because there's this massive consumer trend and sort of industry trend that we're seeing that food as medicine is becoming really important, alternative medicine is becoming really important, and there's a lot of companies tackling this from different angles. So when we spent time studying the market, that we figured out that ultimately behavior change is really, really hard to make. And the subset of the population who really does want to take their health into their own hands, who really wants to actually incorporate these different changes, they're already going out and seeking this type of care. So when you look at functional sort of care providers, you have dietitians, nutritionists, functional medicine doctors, naturopaths. These providers make up a little bit over 100,000 providers in the US. So we said, why not tackle the people who are already have gone through sort of that journey of learning a little bit, getting themselves to a point where they're like, okay, I'm actually going to do something about this and go see a provider. And then we figured out that one of the main pain points for providers was that because the gut microbiome is so complex, the providers can really range from knowing a lot about the gut to knowing very little about the gut. But what's interesting is all of their treatment focuses around treating the gut, and so and the current testing options are very expensive. They're not very in depth, and they don't really include any mood disorders or brain health or anything about that, but gut brain connection. And so we saw that as an obvious starting point of, hey, let's build better functional testing that's more affordable, that has more rich information. And then from there, I started to put together a team of experts that actually could bring this vision to life.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think you're right on time with your test, right? Because gut health is becoming like a really big topic. I think at this point, right, we are finally starting to understand, as you mentioned, right, the connection, gut-brain axis, for example. But I also read recently that changes in microbiome um, are currently being researched to actually treat stuff like MS, for example, which is also an autoimmune disease.
Yeah.
So that is pretty awesome. And you are also with your test and also with your program, also with the nutrition program, you're also making a bunch of claims. For example, that users report higher energy, better sleep, higher quality of life. And how did you come up with these claims?
Yeah, what we did was we ran a pilot study, actually coming out of the TechStars Accelerator, where we had 150 participants, and we went through a 3-month long study where we actually had each participant take a test once a month, and then we had them fill out standard documentation around, so if they quality of life scores, stress scores, and then based on their unique situation, if they were experiencing symptoms of anxiety or they had been diagnosed with anxiety, we would have them take the GAD-7 score, for example,
Mm-hmm.
or whatever. If they were showing signs of depression, we would have them take that standard documentation and track those symptoms. So we would give patients this set of sort of scores that they were filling out, and they would fill that out at the end of every month. And then what we did was at the end of the 3 months, amalgamated that score and then actually measured the change over time. And that was how we designed the experiment to actually see what the impact the nutritional recommendations from the test was having.
Awesome. That's what you should do, right? And then you basically were tracking them over time, and we're tracking them basically, we did the repeat measurement analysis of that, I would assume, right? So you were tracking baseline, and then you were tracking several time points basically, and then seeing how things got changed with actual validated questionnaires, like what the Get7 is, or quality of life scores. And then obviously health and wellness is really booming, especially over the last 10 years. And during the pandemic, it really exploded. And what do you think changed? What do you think changed during the pandemic that everybody is now really interested in their own health?
Yeah, I think the pandemic was a really interesting time because it was the one time where the world came to a halt because of this virus that was widespread, and it forced people to really think about their health. And we also had millions of people getting infected by the virus, who then a large majority of those people are still experiencing something known as long COVID, where they're experiencing this persistent, lasting sort of chronic health symptoms. And so it really forced a lot of people to think about their health and then becoming more proactive about it. And I think this was probably exacerbated by the fact that coming out of the pandemic, we also had social media like TikTok that connected us all in a way that we weren't connected before. So one of the largest segments on TikTok is known as Gut Talk, and along with a multitude of other of health trends, right? So we're all talking more and more about our health. And I think this is really, of course, was more exacerbated during the pandemic, but I think this is a trend that we've been seeing like over the past decade. And I think there's a lot of systematic reasons for why that happened. More and more Americans are living with chronic illnesses. Over 51% of the population lives with at least one chronic illness. And so when you think about, these rates continuing to go up every single year, the rates of autoimmune illnesses have exploded. The rates for children and neurological disorders are staggering. There's 1 in 27 American children now have autism, which is, it's very significant compared to where it was a decade ago. And 1 in 7 has a learning disability. So when you think about all of these numbers getting worse and worse over time, as a population, we're getting sicker. And that also comes from systematic issues of problems with sort of the different pesticides and chemicals that are now found in our food sources the way that they weren't found before. But I think this has been a trend that's been building for a long time, and now just exacerbated by the pandemic.
Yeah, I also just checked. I think 1 in 6 kids is actually obese, which is also mind blowing because kids shouldn't be obese.
Yes.
And this all again, comes down mostly to lifestyle. And you mentioned before, right? Also food as medicine, but also food as being something that should be enjoyable and healthy, especially if you like eat a lot of veggies, eat a lot of fruits. Then what I found is that sometimes I'm really craving some really amazing fruits that I haven't had in a while, versus craving these Oreo cookies, for example.
And
it's awesome.
there's really interesting. I think there's really interesting science around that, right? Like the type of food that you eat determines what type of bacteria is going to be in your gut, and then that bacteria will chemical signal up to your brain what you're actually craving. So you can really change the different foods that you like and crave, which is fascinating.
Yeah, there you go. And I did not know about the gut talk on TikTok. I'm going to follow that as well. But I love these subtopics. Now let's talk a little bit about consumers. Many consumers, many patients are fed up with the current healthcare system, which is fairly reactive. It's not really proactive. And, it's basically that you have symptoms, you go to a doctor, the doctor either treats your symptoms or can't find something, and then, tells you that it's all in your head. I have heard
Yeah.
it several times. It's all in your head.
Yeah.
You should see a psychologist.
Yeah.
Especially, I feel especially when it comes to women's health can be very complex. We have
Yeah.
sometimes weird symptoms. Providers are puzzled about symptoms, especially when nothing shows up in a blood test and blood work
Yeah.
comes back normal in range. And as a result, a lot of consumers, especially women, are drawn towards functional medicine. And your company is basically marrying the evidence-based medicine with functional medicine, which is awesome. And what is your observation towards a change in consumer behavior and also a change in consumer values?
Yeah, I think this goes back a little bit to what we were talking about, is that people are sick and tired of being sick, right? And when you look at the rise of functional medicine over the past decade, functional medicine providers now, the pull isn't only from the consumer side, it's also from the provider side. Like, I can't tell you how many doctors I've spoken to who are sick and tired of doubling the amount of prescriptions that they're giving their patients, but their patients aren't really getting any better. So I think because of the way that consumers are now taking their health into their own hands, they're starting to go out and look for more functional care providers. They're starting to look at things like wellness clinics and longevity clinics. You'll notice that most gyms now have a dietitian on hand, or you can book a dietitian visit within that clinic and within the gym, and these are services that didn't exist over a decade ago. So that consumer pull is really changing the way that most businesses operate, and I think eventually we're going to start to see mainstream medicine and primary care docs also evolve to then being less reactive and more preventative. But I think in order to do that, they're going to have the incentives in place, because currently they're incentivized by having patients come in and they're reimbursed by billable hours, right? And so we're seeing that rise in value-based care, and when that becomes sort of more mainstream and more popular, I think that we're going to see providers also adopting. But definitely on the private business side, you can see that consumer health has taken over and touched almost every single line of business.
Yeah, do you see that there's really a change also in the decision-making motivations and consumers?
Yeah, I think when you look at the one of the McKinsey consumer reports came out last year that talked about that consumers were willing to pay more money for a product if they thought it was good for them. And that's why you're seeing in all CPG products now, you'll have things like this is vitamin water versus water, like this, you're seeing more and more brands be hyper focused around packaging and the different health benefits and claims and all these things that sometimes are evidence-based, sometimes are not, but they're starting to include it because that's what consumers want to see, and consumers are willing to pay more for it if they think it's better for them.
Yeah. And speaking of consumers, with Vitract, you are building a community. You have providers on the one side, you have consumers on the other side. And what are you doing to engage everyone? And how are you connecting, with your users, with your consumers?
Yeah, I think when it comes down to the core of it, both the engagement strategies that have worked the best for us on either side is educational content. The more people know, the more providers know about how to use gut testing, around what is the right clinical protocol to include gut testing in the way that they deliver care today, the more they're likely to reach for a gut test the next time they have a patient come in that's talking about certain symptoms that they can't figure out how to treat. The more patients know about how food choices are actually impacting the way that they feel, the more likely they are to go out and seek help, to go out and seek preventative solutions, and functional solutions. So what we do is, on the provider side, we have a weekly newsletter that goes out, and we have evidence-based research, that we include in that research that helps educate them on how to best interact with their patients, on how to best be equipped with information to answer questions from their patients. And then on the patient side, what we do is every time somebody buys a gut test, whether it be via from a provider or whether it be online from our website or other channels, we actually put them all in a group, and that group is moderated by dietitians, and that makes patients feel seen because they're able to go and ask questions and share their experiences. Like, we're seeing these really cool organic sort of community building happening where people will take screenshots of their test results and then ask people, what do you think about this? Are you also seeing this? But that's one of the main sort of things that have been working for us so far.
That's awesome. That's what you want. That's what you want, right? You want to have a really engaged community that is, engaging also with each other. And I am sure, because you mentioned, providers also know more about how they can utilize gut tests more. And I'm sure that, sometimes you're stumbling about a consumer or a provider that, is a little skeptical. So what are you doing when you come across, that type of person?
Yeah, I think what's interesting about the gut testing space is we have a subset of patients who are so passionate about this that they'll take our test, they'll take several other tests on the market, they'll be comparing their results, they know so much about this field. And then on the other side, you have patients that fall into the bucket of the sort of affluent customers that are looking to be preventative about their health. And then on the far sort of spectrum, you have patients that believe that gut health as a field is so early that they can't sort of trust recommendations from a test, and they want to see how things play out. And I think as a company, what we've done is go after the people who already believe in the science, who already are seeking out solutions. However, I think when we think about growing beyond where we are today, to capture that larger subset of audience, eventually there's going to be a piece where there's going to be a large educational piece and push. And the way that we see ourselves doing that is just by publishing more work. I think more data that you have that can prove what you're doing is efficacious is how to win those people over, whether that's a consumer or whether that's a provider. And so the first study that we had was a pilot study with 150 participants, like I mentioned. But now we're looking at larger government grants that can help us fuel further studies. And I think that just given the core of the type of team that we've put together, we have 10 people on the team now, and 5 of them are in the research and development team. So majority of our team really lies in that R&D piece. So we're going to continue to publish more and more studies, and I think that's how we're going to stand out in the field and continue to establish that where we are evidence-based as we claim.
Awesome. And what is next for for Vitract?
Yeah. So I think what's exciting about where we are today is our strategy has shifted from being purely direct to consumer to now really being an omni-channel business, where we also, a big part of what we do is we sell to care providers. We sell to functional medicine docs, naturopaths, to dietitians, all of these sort of providers that treat gut health as a core focus. And what's exciting about working with clinics is we're continuously getting more and more data from clinics. So to give you an example, we had data come out from one of our clinics 2 weeks ago with a functional medicine provider who was treating children with autism. And what he did was he used our test to develop a nutritional protocol called the gut balancing protocol. And what he did, what he found that was after 2 rounds of protocol of that 6-week protocol, he was seeing children report improvements of 25% in memory, cognition, speech. And so we had these great testimonials from parents talking about their children being able to say words they previously couldn't. And what that does for us is it shows that there's a large market in the pediatric space as well. So now what we're looking to do is take some of those results and spin it into a larger clinical trial study, and then that will help us hone our pediatrics strategy. But I think that's kind of the direction that the company is headed in, is taking the work that's coming out of these pilot clinics and then spinning it out into larger studies and developing a robust clinical strategy based on that. Yeah, I think that's it.
That's awesome. Yeah, we are also seeing a lot of stuff happening, especially in the pediatric field. I think this is something that is very exciting, because obviously before, health and wellness was mostly for adults, right? But now we're seeing a lot of supplementation, for example, in the ADHD field. And I think that is something that's really exciting. And how can people reach out if they want to talk to you?
Yeah, I think the best way to reach out to me personally is via email. So you can find me at linta@vitract.com. If you're a provider, you also could go to our website, and we have a practitioner tab where you're able to enter your information, and then someone from our team will get in touch with you and can give you a deeper demo of the product, what the results look like. What we also do is we'll take our results and our gut test results, and we'll compare them across the board with other medical diagnostic grade gut testing, and we'll help you walk through what our test does as a 16S RNA based test versus some of these other sort of qPCR based tests, which are traditionally used in care, and talk and share more about how we're able to provide that in-depth information that they might not be getting in other tests today. And then lastly, if you're a customer, you can also feel free to either purchase a test or book a free consultation with the provider on our website. And there you're able to get some questions answered about the test and learn more. But the best way to reach me directly is either via LinkedIn or my personal email.
Awesome, that is perfect. And now we have some time for some Q&A. And one of my first questions for you is, what do you think is wrong with women's health?
I think one of the main things that is glaringly obvious is, and we see this in the research that we even are using to power some of our AI infrastructure today, is traditionally research has a bias in that participants will tend to be white, male, and women are being largely ignored, right? So when you look at even just generic drugs like an Advil, they're developed from a basis of predominantly male participants, which means it's going to be more efficacious for male than it is for females. And we see this across the board with drugs ranging from treating different chronic illnesses to like an everyday drug like a painkiller, right? So we haven't been building medicine with women in mind, and I think there are cool companies that are starting to improve and work toward that equity piece in including women in clinical trials. But I think that lack of personalization is one of the biggest problems.
Yeah, I read something that until the 1990s, doctors didn't want to involve women in clinical studies because of hormonal changes and all of that stuff, which I found very funny. And then I read an article about I actually forgot the name of it, but it was a sleep medication, and the sleep medication, the dosage was for men, and it was for women. It was way too high. This is why many women were like sleepwalking and doing stuff in their sleep, even driving their cars, which is fairly dangerous.
Yeah.
But it then turns out, because there were so many data points that this happened, and then it turned out that I think the dosage of for women was half of that, which I found, it sounded to me really funny.
Yeah, it's significant, right? It's not a small difference, it's a big difference. I think what's also interesting is most the amount of primary care doctors that we have that are female are half of that of male. So when you think about just if when you think about the way that your females are represented in healthcare, um, it's not nearly the same as if you're a male, right? So if I walk in to see a family doctor and I'm talking about like my period, for example, and I'm talking to a woman who's gone through it, who understands it, it's so much different than talking to a male doctor, right? And most of the time, you're likely to have a male doctor just because of the amount of doctors that the sort of the distribution of gender within the practice. So I think that's also an interesting piece. I think there's a lot of different reasons, and we're just hitting on some of them.
Absolutely, yeah. Does anybody has any other questions? You can put them either in the QA or in the chat. My next question for you is more tied towards your company and you being an entrepreneur. What do you think is like the hardest thing you are currently working on?
Ooh, I think the hardest part about what we're building is, you know, because the gut microbiome fits in this gray area space, it's really hard to take what we know as a product that's not traditionally insurance reimbursable, that providers don't traditionally understand, and then take that field and then embed it within the healthcare system today, versus if we were selling, say, a blood test. Everyone understand what a blood panel is, and then it just becomes about building a business and running a sales operation and doing the other things that are more growth oriented, versus you're building in the gut microbiome or food as medicine space or alternative functional medicine space. There's a huge educational component, so you have almost an uphill battle, because you're right off the bat, the notion that you're met with is providers don't understand what you're doing. So first you have to get them to understand what you're doing, and then from there you have to make the sale. So I think it's a very challenging space to build in. But I also think because of that, the opportunity is so big, given that we have all of this research that proves how instrumental the gut is for the development of chronic illnesses. And I think bringing that lens to the healthcare system is a massive opportunity.
Yeah. With two more questions. Do you have any plans for menopause testing?
Not today, but I think that one of the fascinating things that we saw come out of our early clinical data when we were measuring the demographics of the type of patients that were taking the test was we saw a skew towards pregnant women taking the test. And that was fascinating because a lot of either new mothers or pregnant women start to experience mental health issues the way that they haven't pre-pregnancy. And because they're in a place where they're hesitant to try a new medication or take new medication because of their baby's health, they are looking at actively different solutions that can help them. So, when you're supplementing with nutrition or supplements or lifestyle, of course the side effects aren't the same as if you're taking a new medication. So new moms are gravitating towards these type of alternative care solutions. And so we think that there's a sort of an untapped market there and something to work on and grow into. But the reason that we're staying sort of squarely in metabolic and digestive health along with mental health is we want to be really targeted in our approach to market. But I think as we continue to grow the company, we're going to be adding better testing and more applications of different types of testing. So I think it's definitely possible, just not in the near pipeline.
And then last question, what does how does the company balance claims with the regulatory environment? For example, supplements can treat, cure, prevent, or diagnose any diseases.
For sure. So we always use the language of this is an adjunctive approach to what you're doing. And I think you might have even noticed this in the way that I'm talking about the product today is we're looking to improve the quality of life of people and reduce symptoms. So if you're able to live 30% better than you are today, that or whatever the X amount of percentage might be based on your condition and your demographic and whatever else, that is the goal for the company. And we never use the language of curing an illness, because I think that comes with a lot of legal challenges. But what's fascinating is there are millions of people with stories like mine who've been able to use nutrition and supplements and sort of these other sort of functional approaches to heal their gut and be completely in remission, and be completely symptom free. We just don't advertise it for legal claims and reasons.
Yep, as you should. Awesome. Well, if there are no other questions, thank you so much for joining us, Linta, and thank you everybody who attended. And I hope this was informative, and I'll see you all next time. Thank you.
Thanks, Susanne. Bye.
Bye.